The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 226.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the EL. Today we have Jeremy Bloom, author of Fueled by Failure, Using Detours and Defeats to Power Progress. This is one of my favorite interviews I've done in a while, and actually since the beginning. Jeremy, there's just something so genuine and real, and you can tell he puts down his ego as he's going through this different information, and some of this interview is actually about that in itself, putting down his ego. So there's some paradigm shifting information in this interview, and I got a ton out of it. I was taking notes, and it was a very fun interview to do with a fun individual. But anyway, without further ado, let's bring on Jeremy. Welcome, Jeremy, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before you take a deep dive into your book, Fueled by Failure, will you take just a moment to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you personally.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Loveland, Colorado, most of my life, and first saw the Olympics on TV when I was 10 years old, and just was struck by how incredible they were. And I had been a skier ever since I was 3 years old. My mom, dad, brother, and sister would go up to Keystone, Colorado every weekend and just kind of free ski. We just loved to get in the mountains. And that's when it kind of hit me out. Holy cow, I could do something, with this. And so that's when I got the Olympic bug. And I was also a football player, watching John Elway, the quarterback for the Broncos, for so long, and wanted to be like John. And I told my mom and dad at 10 that I wanted to ski in the Olympics and I wanted to play in the NFL. And they both looked at me and said, honey, you can do that if you put your mind to it and you attack your dreams. And so that's what I did. I just really tried to attack them, and through a lot of good luck and fortune was able to live out both of those dreams and competed in 2 Olympics for the United States in freestyle skiing, and then went on to get drafted in the 5th round by the Philadelphia Eagles and spent 2 seasons there and a season with the Pittsburgh Steelers before launching into my nonprofit and now running a venture-backed startup.
Excellent. So, Jeremy, I would love to dig deeper into a lot of different things that you just said. However, we will stick to the format and stick to focusing on the book itself. So, first off, thank you for sharing that. And now let's jump right into the book. Fueled by Failure, Using Detours and Defeats to Power Progress, which was made available today as we're recording this, and as of when this actually launches, it'll be a couple of days prior. So debuted at number 1 on Amazon in its category, which is fantastic for being a brand new book. And Jeremy, we're going to move quickly, but we're here today to cover the top questions that this listener, this future reader, would like to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing Fueled by Failure?
Yeah, good question. My inspiration for writing this book just came from my own personal experiences and also the observation of others. I grew up with some incredibly talented athletes, and now I'm exposed to some wonderfully talented entrepreneurs. And it's been my observation in life that the inevitable setbacks that everybody encounters along their journey, whether it's their goals are in athletics or their goals are to build $1 billion business, everybody handles those moments in time a little bit differently. And we all have seen or heard of people that have experienced adversity along the way and have overcome that to create big companies and legacies in athletics. I mean, you think about it, Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. Well, why didn't Michael Jordan quit at that point when so many others would have? And, Steve Jobs, why did he start a company called Next and Pixar after he was fired from Apple, the company that he started? And, I've seen friends and teammates deal with these moments in their life and just completely kill their confidence. And so I've always been interested and fascinated by the psychology of these moments in our lives. And so I've been thinking about this topic in this book for, well over a decade. And taking a step back and thinking about where we have all come from. We're all born into this world, and we use failure as a mechanism to learn. And it's pretty pure. There's not a lot of other emotions involved. That's how we learn how to walk, falling down 100 times before we learn how to properly walk. And, learning the English language, we mutter out all these crazy words en route to learning proper English. But along our journey, we develop an ego. And one of the things that the ego can do to be destructive to our dreams is over-personalize the setbacks in our life. And so I wanted to dive deep into this topic. I think there's been a lot of surface information in this world about it. We've all heard quotes like, failure makes you stronger, but I wanted to ask why that is. And I wanted to talk to some of the most successful people and also share my journey in trying to answer this question, in hopes that the learnings that I have been exposed to and the people that I call mentors and friends can help somebody else have a better chance of accomplishing theirs.
So Jeremy, this next question I feel like is so important because of just the sheer number of books that come out on a daily basis. And especially when you talk about for entrepreneurs, there can be 200 plus that come out each month alone. So what makes your book different from others regarding the same or similar topic?
Yeah, another great question. And I'm not much of a self-promoter. I think of great books like, The Hard Things About the Hard Things and by Ben Horowitz. And there's just so many great books out there that I have read. But I think what's different about, my book is I grew up in the world of athletics. And my mentors were guys like Mike Tomlin, who's the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers and probably one of the best leaders I've ever been around, business or not, or athletics or not. Andy Reid with the Philadelphia Eagles and countless Olympic coaches. And so I think my perspective is just a little bit different and a little bit, potentially more unique than some of the entrepreneurs who grew up, getting their MBA or in Ivy League schools and in more of potentially a cookie cutter environment. And so what I've done is really tried to take the lessons that I've learned in athletics and team dynamics. And now, being a CEO of a venture-backed company now for 5 years, I've made a lot of the mistakes and learned from them and have some great mentors around the table that I continue to learn from. I try to share a lot of those in this book.
So Jeremy, this next question is a little bit awkward in that I'm basically asking, how did you write the book to be read? Is this a book that they can jump in, jump out, cherry picking information? Or did you really design it to be read from front to back?
Well, one of my pet peeves of books is redundancy. It just really bothers me when authors just keep talking about the same subject over and over again. And so I actually really wanted to write a book that was super concise and didn't repeat things that I was saying over and over. And it's a really quick read. I mean, the book, front to back is maybe 140 pages. And so, feedback from the early Amazon Vine program has been consistent with that. And that's something I'm really happy about and proud of. People can pick up this book and literally read it in an afternoon. And it's a quick read, but hopefully it's a powerful read. And even if there's 1, 2, 3 different aspects of the book that I talk about that resonate with people, then I think that's success.
So Jeremy, we're to my favorite part of the entire interview, and that's where I like to hand over the mic and really ask that you just take a deep dive into the content. Give the future reader a great idea of what this book's all about. So will you take the next 5 to 8 minutes and lay it out for us?
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about a couple chapters. I'll start with I guess chapter 1, which is one of my most favorite. My biggest dream in athletics was to win an Olympic gold medal. And my dad is an Olympic historian. He absolutely loves the Olympics. Growing up, he would oftentimes get, pretty emotional when U.S. athletes would win Olympic medals and opening ceremonies. And, he's just one of my biggest heroes in life. And he was my mentor, my football coach, my ski coach. And I just really wanted to win a gold medal, not only for myself, but for him. And, in a sport, I won 3 world championships. I won more World Cups than anybody in history in a single season. And I was ranked number 1 in the world coming into the Olympics. And I had 23 seconds to make a 22-year-old dream come true. And I just had one small mistake in my in my final run in Torino, and it cost me a chance to win an Olympic gold medal. And I talk about, what a dark place that put me in, and I talk a little bit about how I got through it, and it's around this principle I call it the 48-hour rule. And I think it's really important when anybody, we deal with things in our everyday life. We'll lose a client, or we'll lose a big game, or we won't accomplish a big goal. And I think the most important thing to do in those times of our lives is to prescriptively, with ourselves, set a deadline for how long we're going to allow ourselves to revisit this, to continue to stew over it, to be obsessed with it. And when I woke up in the next morning in Torino, I said, all right, I'm giving myself 48 hours. That's it. 48 hours to be inside my head, try to dissect what happened, take the lessons out of that experience and move on. And I did that. And for 48 hours, nobody could talk to me. My family couldn't call, or I was just inside my head thinking and learning. And then after that, I was moving on, and I committed to that to myself. And about 3 days later, I went to the NFL Combine and competed well there, and then got drafted in the NFL and was just moving on. So that's a concept that I use today in business, and I continue to use in athletics. Another one of my favorite chapters in the book, and something that I just really inherently believe strongly in, is this idea of starting with culture. Before you have a big business, even if you have a small business, even if you have one employee, two employees, I think it's incredibly important to define what your culture is. And it's not a top-down approach to say, hey, this is how you need to act, because culture is typically built from within. But it's more of a personal roadmap for people to take a look at on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, to say, this is what I need to do to become the best employee, the best leader that I can possibly be. And at Integrate, the company that I run, we have 5 cultural pillars. And the first cultural pillar at Integrate is performance. And we define that as we know that the most important key metric is increasing the overall value of the business. And everybody buys into that. And when you set performance first in a culture, it creates a different tone. And Reed Hastings at Netflix, this is a concept that I got from him. At Netflix, they don't celebrate tenure. If you've been there for 4 or 5 years, they might give you a high five, but they're not going to call you out on all hands call or do the. They only he uses the word lionize performance. And so that has been a great cultural pillar for us. The second cultural pillar is being entrepreneurial. Many people have heard the phrase that having a startup is like jumping out of an airplane and assembling the parachute on the way down. And that has very much been my experience with Integrate over the last 5 years. As you're working to build value and you're talking to customers and you're trying to figure out where your niche is and ultimately what you're going to become, you have to be incredibly flexible in changing business models and testing different things, being willing to fail, being willing to get it wrong. But the key is to really try to not make the same mistake twice. The third cultural pillar is personal responsibility, and we would define that as you lead with conviction, but accept when your ideas aren't implemented with grace. It's this notion that no matter who you are in the business and no matter what your function is, you take pride in the fact that you are the CEO of whatever the job is that you're doing. And probably most importantly to this one is your default is to fall on the sword rather than point the finger and place blame. There's very little room, I think in a team environment, whether it be athletic or business, for people to just point fingers. And if you have somebody consistently doing that and they're built in this victim-based mentality thinking where kind of everything, any setback is always somebody else's fault, it's really hard to lock arms with a person like that and build a great culture. The fourth pillar is creativity. And we would define that as you are a curator of originality. It's really easy in a business as an individual contributor to get stuck in, whatever you have to do that day, like a factory worker. You come in, you punch the clock, you do the job in front of you, and you leave. I think Google got it right where they encouraged people to take 10% of their time to think of something completely different, learn a new skill or learn a new area of the business and bring fresh ideas. And I think that creativity is so incredibly important to small and mid-sized and even large businesses. And then finally, and this is probably the only one that's the non-negotiable, is humility. We would define that as you're quick to give credit for results and slow to take it. You're quick to acknowledge the help and contributions of others, and you know that success is not contingent on the failures of others. And it's this whole idea that yes, everybody wants to build a successful company. Everybody wants to keep customers happy and make their customers successful and win in all those types of things. But nothing's more important than our happiness. And I have found, and I think our team would say the same thing, that we're more productive when we enjoy working with each other. And that's not to build a yes culture. We don't have a yes culture. We don't believe in a yes culture. We very much believe in pushing back when we need to and curating our ideas even when it's a little uncomfortable. But it's this no asshole rule. It's just life is too short for that. And then finally, under humility, we say no rock star policy. It's okay if your colleagues think you're rock stars, but as soon as you think, hey, I'm a rock star in this organization, it's a path 9 times out of 10 to entitlement, and entitlement can really be a cultural disease. So I very much believe in setting culture from the very beginning of what you want to define and who your organism eventually wants to come. And again, it's not a top-down approach to say, hey, you're not doing this. It can be. Don't get me wrong. It certainly can be, because if somebody's outside the guidelines, it's great to sit them down and have that conversation. And if you have a framework in place to do that, it makes that conversation so much easier instead of just a lot of emotion flying around and saying, hey, you're just not being nice or whatever. So I very much believe in culture.
So Jeremy, that was a fantastic review. You have a way of communicating and telling stories that really draw someone in. So thank you for taking us through that. And you did a phenomenal job of giving us the breakdown. I feel like this next question is sometimes mean because you already did this. You already broke it down, and now we're asking you to take it a step further. And that if the reader could only take away one concept, principle, or action item out of your entire book, everything you just took the time to discuss with us, what would you personally want that to be?
Suppressing your ego. I read this book in 2004 called The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer. And I grew up in a Western world where everything was focused around the best, winning this or winning that or being the best in the world. And that's really what drove most of my motivation up to that point, to beat other people, to stand on top of a podium, to make a lot of money and do all those types of things. And I read this book and I came to this chapter and it said, give up your need to win. And it was such a foreign concept to me. I couldn't even wrap my head around even where to begin this new mental shift. But I kept coming back to it, and I was committed to trying it on and seeing the effects that it would have on my life. And so I did, and I started doing things that were completely out of my comfort zone level. Like, for example, going up to some of my biggest competitors before a race, people I very much wanted to beat, and say, hey, be careful of this turn or that turn, giving them advice on the course to help them. And it completely liberated my ego and this selfish desire to beat other people. And it enabled me and unlocked this entirely new part of me, this intrinsic motivational source, to look inside of myself and say, no, I care more about personal growth. I care more about becoming the best possible skier in every single aspect that I possibly can for myself and nobody else. And so I stopped caring as much about this idea of winning or gold medals. And interestingly enough, that next year is when I won more consecutive World Cups than anyone had done previously in history. And it was just out of body feeling, because of course I was happy I was winning because I was accomplishing my goals of, being the best skier in that day. But it was no longer a feeling of I'm superior to anybody else. And I just think our egos can get in the way of so many different things in our life, our personal relationships that we have with people, our professional relationships, that person that always has to have their opinion heard or always has to be right. And so I guess there's a lot of concepts in here that I'm passionate about, but I guess if there was one, it would just be and everybody's different. Everybody has a different ego. So just think about the decisions that you make in your life and how much ego is attached to that. And if there's no attachment, great. You're way past where I am. But if you think that ego potentially has a larger control on your life than you'd like, there's a lot of things that you can do to try to suppress that.
Jerry, that's incredible. You brought up something that was one of the reasons why we started this podcast in the first place, and that was that the nuggets that you can get out of a book can completely change you. And you talk about this book where you read that and you fought it. I'm the same way. I'll pick up a book and I will read something in that book that will be something of a paradigm shift. And I guess at the time I don't know it's one, and I will fight the information. But it resonates with me because it's something that kind of hits me and sometimes just straight up, ticks me off. Yeah. It makes me dwell on it and think about it. And then sometimes, for the majority of the time, it makes me realize that it's correct. So yeah, even you saying what you said that you got out of that book, even my ego right now is like, what? That is, he was giving advice to the competition, and this isn't a kid's soccer game. This is at the highest level. That's incredible. I wonder if some of those athletes wondered if you were trying to get inside their head. I know you weren't, and the purpose was that, but I wonder if some of these guys were like, why is this guy telling me this? Is he trying to make me extra careful or something? So no, that's fantastic. That was an awesome story. And Jerry, do you have a favorite quote from your book? Something that you wrote that you feel like will resonate with the audience? And will you take a minute to explain what it means to you?
Yeah. Don't let the good days go to your head or the bad days go to your heart. And that quote really goes along with what we were just talking about in ego. And one of my favorite slides, if you just Google what success really looks like, just put into Google what success really looks like and click on images. There's this great slide that on, what people think it looks like is there's this up and to the right line of success. And then what it really looks like is there's all these squiggly lines up and down, but generally up and to the right. And I think no matter who you are, life is like that. And no matter how much success that you've had, and, even from afar, we look at anybody, people that started Google, people that started Facebook, whatever, all these people in life go through ups and downs. And I think if we can all just remind ourselves, and it's a lifestyle, it's not a quote. It's not a quote we'll put on a board and all of a sudden our life is going to change. It really is a lifestyle shift and something we have to commit ourselves to. But this idea of not getting too high in our victories, not getting too low in our defeats, and always kind of being in the middle as much as we possibly can, and just reminding ourselves about that. My experience in trying to commit myself to that lifestyle, and I'm nowhere where I should be or need to be, but I'm a student of the topic, has just helped me generally be more happy. There's all kinds of things that go wrong in the business every day, things that go right and wrong in my personal life. And sometimes I get overly attached to that, overly obsessed with it, and thinking under a microscope and analyzing every single situation too deeply, and reminding myself to take a step back, look out the windshield or the telescope, realize that we're all playing the long game a little bit. And I think that quote does a great job of summarizing that idea.
Yeah, it's excellent. And we'll put that in the show notes at theelpodcast.com. And that picture that you mentioned, I immediately started looking it up because I've seen it before, and I guess the trouble is that we always see someone after all those squiggly lines. We always see them at the top of that point. We just assume that it was a straight line up, and there was all kinds of curves in between.
Look at social media. We just post when that curve's at the highest, right? We don't see a lot of, all the other stuff is hidden behind pockets, and people necessarily don't want to talk about it. To be honest with you, writing this book, this idea of fueled by failure and openly talking about my biggest failures in life was not comfortable or easy in the beginning. You become vulnerable to that, and I'm human as well. And but again, it's just like the idea of helping your greatest competitors. It liberates you from the chains of hiding from any of that.
Yeah.
And And I think that there's a concept in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I had just been on an interview where I was being interviewed, and I had talked about some regrets that I had really never talked about to anyone besides my wife. And so on one end, very kind of edgy and uncomfortable, but afterwards, extremely liberating as far as, the way I felt and getting it out there and stop, trying to have ego and hide those kind of things, those regrets. So
well, my dad is a clinical psychologist, and if he was listening to this podcast, he would be happy because like we're having a therapy session. He'd probably make fun of us, but that's fine.
That's excellent. So Jeremy, this next question, I love this one as well because everyone's always looking for that next phenomenal book. So we're not asking for any recommendation. I always say we're looking for the recommendation. So if there's only one book you could suggest based on the way that it's changed your life, maybe created a lifestyle or a paradigm shift, which book would you recommend?
Well, Good to Great by Jim Collins. That's the obvious one in business. He does such an incredible job in that book, articulating what it took for companies to go from good to great. And even market leaders were smashed by incumbents that were much smaller because they did things differently. So I think that one in business. I mentioned The Power of Intention. Wayne Dyer can get a little out there sometimes. For me, he's I have no problem with being with liberal writers, the idea of being liberal, but sometimes his concepts are a little too. But every once in a while, they'll just come up with something that just makes so much sense to me, and I won't just read it. I'll write it down. I'll think about it, and then I'll try it on for size in my everyday life, and then I'll commit myself to working on that. So I guess personally, some of his books, might have a good impact for people.
Excellent. So thank you. Good to Great has been recommended before, obviously, because it's such a phenomenal book. And the second one has not been. So I'll appreciate that. I'm going to look that one up myself. And Jeremy, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for listeners to not only get more information on you, but also get more information on your book, Fueled by Failure?
Sure. JeremyBloom.com. You can get in touch with me there if you want to ask me a question or read more about why I wrote the book. You can watch some keynotes that I've done on this topic before, and you can read some of the people that contributed to the book, what they have to say as well.
Excellent. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this book. Now you can add author to the list, the Olympian and NFL football player, entrepreneur, and author.
Yeah, I will with pride. Thanks. It was a very fun project for me, a labor of love for sure. But I have a newfound respect for any author out there. It's not always easy to write a book, but it was a fun project.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you'd like more information on Jeremy or his book, Fueled by Failure, check out the show notes at theelpodcast.com. And if you'd like an opportunity to win this book, you can go to the same website, theelpodcast.com, and become a VIP. The last thing I want to state here real quick is if you are an entrepreneur and you have a great story about how reading has changed your life, maybe personally, maybe professionally, then connect with me on Twitter at Wade D. Danielson. Private message me. I'd love to hear about your story and possibly highlight you and your business and your story on a very soon and upcoming episode.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to theelpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's theelpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.